Well, this is it. The beginning of the end. The final hurrah before this franchise started snaking the drains. Pun certainly intended. Still, at least this last mission was pretty great, and it also wrapped up pretty much every loose end this series ever had, but maybe not in the best possible way. Welcome back to my Metal Gear Retrospective. So just in case I didn't already make it obvious, let me confirm that yes, I will be dedicating this episode to Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots. This is actually still a rather unique and interesting title for several reasons, most of which have little to nothing to do with the actual game itself. For example, this was the first game ever that utilized a 50GB dual-layered Blu-ray for the initial release. Not only that, but the game actually exceeded even that size as it also utilized file compression and mandatory installation to fit the game on such a disc. Sure, this almost seems quaint when compared with today's game sizes, but it was still a pretty big deal at the time. This, in conjunction with how the game was developed and operated, also meant that it actually couldn't be released on anything other than the PS3. After all, the 360 only used DVDs, and it also had a completely different architecture and method of running games. Maybe certain high-end PCs could have managed to run it, but as far as I understand, even that would have been a bit of a challenge. Now, I will say that I'm not quite sure why the game was never ported in later years, as I'm fairly certain that should have been possible by now. If nothing else, a PS4 remaster should at least have been possible, as it wouldn't exactly be the first we've gotten of those. It certainly doesn't seem likely that we'll ever see a port of it now though, so yeah, this game will forever be a PS3 exclusive. There is, however, a bit of an elephant in the room here, isn't there? In fact, it's an elephant that this series has utilized before, but that got quite a bit bigger with this one. I am of course talking about this game's legendary amount of cutscenes. Now, before you ask, no, I don't necessarily mind the cutscenes. Hell, some of them are downright brilliant, but come on. It's not usually a good thing when the amount of non-interactive segments in your supposedly interactive experience takes up over 8 fucking hours. That's almost as much as the combined runtime of the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. Again, I personally don't mind cutscenes all that much, but bloody hell, Kojima, if you want to make films this bad, just make a damn film! Even the length of the individual cutscenes can be rather excessive, with one running a whole 27 minutes, officially the longest cutscene ever in a video game. Seriously, it actually holds that very world record. All that said, I can't say these cutscenes detract all that much from the overall game. In fact, it could be argued that they only add to the game's enjoyment, excessive though they may be. It's not like we don't get any gameplay either, far from it, so although I freely admit that this game is very cutscene heavy, and I absolutely understand how that could be a turnoff, it certainly isn't in my case. Either way, there is, rather obviously, quite a story being told in this game, so I guess we should just get started. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily as easy as it seems. You see, if you have one of the first physical releases of this game, you'll have to wait for the game to install first, which actually takes quite a long time. Fair enough, you don't necessarily have to go through all of this anymore, as some of the later releases, in particular the digital ones, eliminates the need for any extra installation, but I still remember the first time I fired up this game and had to watch Snake smoking a few cigarettes for several long minutes. Seriously, it was so frustrating. Making things even worse was the fact that this wasn't even all the installation you needed. Fine, they eventually released a patch that allowed you to do a full installation, eliminating this problem, but initially, you actually had to go through even more installation every time you completed an act of the game. I guess this was a good way of forcing you to take a break, but still, very annoying. In any case, once we get past all of that, we'll finally get to start up the game and get going, right? I mean, what else could possibly happen?
Stop making excuses and start making changes today! Pick up the phone and order the drill sergeant's recruit workout now! Don't wait! This is a limited time offer only!
Make sure you stay hydrated and load up on nano!
Sure.
Yeah, that's not confusing at all, is it? In essence, this is just Kojima doing his Kojima thing, as the game actually starts off with these weird live-action segments, sort of spoofing various TV commercials and shows. They don't really have any significance to the rest of the game other than a few references here and there, but I guess they are at least somewhat interesting. Maybe. Now, you might think that you just get a random selection of these upon starting your game, but you can actually switch between them if you want. Basically, it's as if you're watching an actual TV in this universe, complete with the ability to change channels. Again, this is entirely unnecessary and adds roughly naught to the game, but nah, it's just weird. Thankfully, these things don't last that long, and once they're done, the game finally gets going. 5 years after the events of MGS2, we're reintroduced to Solid Snake, who hasn't exactly aged well. As a matter of fact, he's not even known as Solid Snake anymore, but rather Old Snake, which seems a bit rude to me. I mean, what's next? Are you going to change Otacon's name to Nerdy Specs? In any case, you might quite understandably wonder just how Snake could have aged so much in the first place, and well, it's kind of a messy and convoluted story. In essence, he's suffering from accelerated aging as a result of his genetic programming. It's all because he's a clone. Yeah, this is simplifying things a bit, but basically, Snake's body is quickly deteriorating because he was designed with a limited lifespan. He was never intended to have a full life. In case he was ever captured, the US government wouldn't want him to be recreated and or used against them, so he was made sterile and given a shorter lifespan precisely to prevent such possibilities. I'm not sure all of that makes complete sense though, in fact I'm fairly certain it doesn't, but it is the story we're given. Luckily, this doesn't mean that the rest of the game takes place in a retirement facility or whatever, but they certainly let you know, pretty much from the get-go, that this will be Snake's final mission. What exactly is this last mission though? Well, it seems Liquid, whose spirit is currently inhabiting Ocelot's body, just go with it, has spent the time since MGS2 creating a massive private military corporation called Outer Heaven. Comprised of the 5 largest PMCs on the planet, Liquid now has active units all over the globe and is preparing to take over the world. The thing is that Liquid is already well on his way to accomplish this goal, as his PMCs now rival even the United States Army in terms of numbers and capabilities. As it happens though, his and any other active military troops are still under the control of the Patriots, as everything, and I mean absolutely everything, is now apparently run by the so-called SOP system. Oh, I am so not exaggerating. People in this universe aren't even allowed to take a shit unless this system says it's okay. Not only that, but somehow everyone has just agreed to take part in all of this for absolutely no apparent reason. Maybe it was part of some new iTunes agreement or something, I don't know. Well, okay, so this system is primarily used for military purposes. For example, a given weapon can only be fired by its registered owner, as they have all been fitted with nanomachine-based ID technology. Basically, the ID of the gun has to match the ID of the user, which is actually possible to do in real life as well now. You don't need nanomachines to do it though, but I can let that slide. This system is also meant to augment and enhance a soldier's abilities though. Apparently, they not only have their vitals constantly monitored, but their reaction times, stamina, precision and squad synchronization are also finely tuned and optimized. In essence, this system can make normal soldiers into better, tougher and more reliable super combatants. While all of this is somewhat far-fetched and convoluted, I can still go along with most of it. It does kinda work within this context. That said, I still think it's a bit weird that the Patriots not only felt the need to control the world's military power and flow of official information and whatnot, they actually felt the need to censor people's speech. No, I'm totally serious. Over the course of this game, you learn that SOP doesn't just monitor and control every soldier, weapon and battlefield in the world, it also limits the vocabulary of anyone in the system. It's not a massive restriction though, as there's actually only one word people aren't allowed to say. Patriot. Well, technically you can still say it, but it'll come out as Lali Lule Lo. Yeah, because that certainly wouldn't raise any eyebrows, would it? I mean, if, for example, a soldier heroically died defending his country, I for one would expect to hear someone calling him a true Lali Lule Lo. That's just common decency. Okay, so in fairness, they did actually establish that this was a thing back in MGS2, but at that time, you could potentially have argued that this wasn't so much speech restriction, just sort of a code used by those who knew about the Patriots. Here though, they make it absolutely clear that Patriot is a no-no word that only those outside of the SOP system are allowed to use. You know, 'cause reasons. Either way, the near-universal implementation of this whole confusing system means that even with all the manpower at his disposal, Liquid still doesn't have any way of actually taking control of the world, at least not seemingly. It's still very clear that he doesn't exactly have the best of intentions though, and as such, the US, or more specifically Roy Campbell, wants him stopped. Seeing as neither the US nor the UN can officially undertake or sanction what is basically an assassination mission, Snake agrees to do what must be done and heads to the Middle East to kill Liquid and put a stop to whatever his evil plans might be. As he doesn't know Liquid's exact location though, Snake must first find and meet up with Rat Patrol 01, a Special Forces PMC investigation unit that just happens to be led by none other than Meryl Silverberg that we last saw back in MGS1. While she's still as good of a character as ever, there is something about her I do feel the need to talk about. Her relationship with Roy Campbell. You see, after Snake and Meryl meet up and she learns that he's working with Campbell, she has a bit of a hissy fit as she's not exactly his biggest fan. Why? Because she found out that he's not just her uncle as she previously thought, he is in fact her father. This is actually something we could learn back in MGS1, but only if we got the alternate non-canon ending. If you recall, MGS1 had sort of a minigame-like segment where you had to withstand Ocelot torturing you with this electric table thing. Although you're obviously meant to fight your way through this, you do actually have the option to just give up and end the torture immediately, but doing so will also cause Meryl to die. Yeah, while it might initially seem like this only makes it so you don't have to withstand any more torture, it does end up altering the ending so that Meryl actually dies and Snake rides off with Otacon instead. We also get a bit of an extra dialogue with Campbell where he reveals his true biological connection with Meryl.
Meryl was my daughter.
What?
I didn't find out until recently. I got a letter from her mother, my dead brother's wife. I was going to tell her after this operation was over.
Colonel,
It's okay, Snake. Thanks anyway.
That's right, in an alternate timeline, Meryl is actually Roy's daughter. But now that's also part of the original timeline, meaning that this must actually be the alternate timeline after all, right? Well, no, because Meryl is still alive in this timeline, which must make it the original timeline. Then again, Roy is somehow her father now, but how can that be possible?
The time continuum has been disrupted, creating this new temporal event sequence resulting in this alternate reality.
I guess it ultimately doesn't matter that much though, and it certainly doesn't take anything away from the rest of the game. Something, or rather someone, that may be a bit more distracting though, is this game's new arms dealer. You see, before Snake reaches Meryl, he's suddenly confronted by a soda-drinking monkey that, at first, seems to have developed the power of speech.
Pretty sweet, huh? Whoa, hold it. Watch where you pointing that thing.
Yeah, as you can see, this was just a minor fake-out, as Drebin is a guy, he just happens to have a pet monkey that drinks soda, and smokes, and makes annoying noises, and adds absolutely nothing of value to anything whatsoever. Still, at least he, Drebin himself isn't anything to shout about either. He does have a purpose here, but he's not all that interesting, and the way he's portrayed isn't exactly all that endearing. I've seen worse, but he just comes across as such a douche, and a pretentious, unnecessarily verbose douche at that. Basically, Drebin is a weapons dealer who can provide Snake with all sorts of black market goodies. There is a rather convoluted explanation as to how he can do this, considering the SOP system is supposed to make such a thing impossible, but all you really need to know is that this guy can sell you weapons. Somewhat weirdly though, transactions with Drebin don't actually require money, but rather so-called Drebin points. These can be collected in a few different ways, but they're mostly acquired by picking up extra weaponry and ammunition on the battlefield. How many points you need obviously depends on the items you want, but it also varies according to the current war price. That's right, the war price. You see, in this universe, they already reached and passed the so-called peak oil point, which resulted in the crash of the oil market. As such, the world had to find some other commodity to base their economies on, and the one they settled for was war. Yeah, seems like the next logical choice to me too. Yeah, I know, this is pretty much all the Patriots doing, but no, that doesn't really make it more believable that war would be the first thing to replace oil as a worldwide economic commodity. Could it become more like one? Absolutely, but I would think, or at the very least hope, that we would try something else first. Like, I don't know, not war? Clearly I'm not a financial analyst though, so this is the situation at hand. What this ultimately means for Snake is that Drebin's prices are based on the amount of conflict in a given area. Basically, if there's heavy battle, prices rise, and vice versa. Not that you'll necessarily notice much of a price difference either way. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I barely ever saw that much difference in Drebin's prices. Certainly not as a result of the battle situations in a given area. Yeah, there might be the occasional dip every now and then, but we're mostly talking savings equivalent of a few pennies, if that. The only real way to save seems to be by playing the game on certain specific days. Yup, it seems even Drebin has the occasional sale, as you actually get 20% off on your purchases by playing on Wednesdays or Sundays. This means that you can actually just make sure your system clock is always set to one of those days, and you'll never have to buy anything at full price. At any rate, it initially seems like Snake won't actually get any use out of any of this, as he tries and fails to fire one of the weapons Drebin offers him. Apparently, this is due to Snake's nanomachines being of an older generation that's incompatible with the current ID system. Drebin does have a solution though, but it does involve granting him a fair amount of trust.
To ensure you can use non-ID guns, I'm gonna have to suppress the old nanomachines you got in you. Otherwise, they'll interfere with the system. Here, stick yourself with this. It's full of suppressor nanomachines. Relax, it won't hurt. You're scared of needles or something?
Now what could Snake possibly have to fear from a little needle? Okay, so he was once given a shot that secretly contained a deadly airborne virus that was supposed to kill him and pretty much everyone he came into contact with, but that's no reason to be suspicious of a complete stranger wanting to inject him with some unknown substance. That'd just be silly! Snake does allow Drebin to administer this shot though, after which he is indeed able to use his weapons, which must mean we can trust him after all. Drebin then takes off, but says he'll be around if Snake should ever need him, which again makes him sound so trustworthy. Before we go any further, I think this would be a good time to take a closer look at some gameplay elements. Firstly, you're now able to not only walk, run and or crawl, but you can also walk while crouched, roll jump to the sides and combat roll while on the ground. Fair enough, these are mostly rather minor and or insignificant additions, but they just add that extra little layer of immersion. They've also made combat a lot smoother, as aiming and firing now have their own dedicated buttons, instead of being handled by just one. This makes a much bigger difference than you might think, and it also makes it possible for you to move while aiming. Yes, you could move while firing in previous games, but you couldn't really aim while doing so, at least not that accurately. Then there's the new camouflage system, which might be a bit weird, but certainly works way better than before. Basically, your new suit will now automatically copy whatever texture you lean or lie down on whenever you're not moving, instantly making you blend in with your environment. Sure, this may lead to a fair amount of stop-start movement, but that's not really much of an issue. The radar has also received a slight overhaul. As standard, you don't really have any sort of radar, though you do have the so-called threat ring that appears when you're standing still or moving slowly. This basically shows you any enemies in your vicinity as spikes on the ring, which actually works quite well. It does also pick up animal movements, but it's still quite a neat tool to have. You do get a more enhanced radar-like tool as well though, this time in the form of an electronic eye patch. Called the Solid Eye, this device gives you a fuller, more detailed radar, as well as information on your enemies and their weaponry. It also has night vision and binocular modes, so all in all, this is a rather special little eye patch. Unfortunately, this and plenty of the other devices in the game still operate on batteries though, meaning they will run out of juice quite often. I'm fairly certain they have improved the battery lives, and stuff like the threat ring does help when you have to turn things off, but in my opinion, this is still slightly less than ideal. Seriously, why can't things just have infinite battery life? Sure, it'd be kind of a stretch, but I'm fairly certain it could still work, considering the older games didn't have fucking batteries. I mean, I've never heard anyone say, yeah, Metal Gear's good and all, but I just can't get over how nothing ever runs out of juice. That's just too unrealistic. The batteries certainly aren't enough of a distraction to ruin the game though, especially considering you can and will pick up quite a few extra batteries over the course of the game, and they do recharge relatively quickly. Just unequip whatever's using them for a few minutes, and there you go, fully charged again. You know, just like how batteries work in real life. Either way, if you do have enough charge to use the Solid Eye, you can also use that to distinguish between PMC enemies and rebel operatives that you can actually help out and befriend. The thing is that most of the areas in the game are war zones, and while you are supposed to remain out of sight as much as possible, that can be quite tricky without giving the rebel forces a bit of a helping hand. You see, PMCs will attack you on sight, but the rebels can actually become allies. If you take out the PMCs and or their armored vehicles, turrets and such, the rebels will start falling in love with you and allow you to move freely among them. You can then also give them various restorative items, which will in turn make them give you some ammo or something, at least usually. This is not only pretty useful, it can actually be rather fun. Fighting with these guys to rid the area you're in of the PMC threat feels pretty great, and it breaks up the potential monotony of the game by having these kind of mini-missions every now and then. No, you don't have to do this, and not every area can actually be liberated or whatever, but I still think this is a pretty neat option. I guess I should also mention that, like in the previous couple of games, you not only have a health meter, but also a psych gauge as it's called this time around. While this gauge does work somewhat similarly to the previous games' stamina meters, it actually monitors Snake's mental health and revolves around a rather different variable this time around: your stress level. Well, that shouldn't be much of a problem. I mean, it's not like I tend to get all that stressed anyway. Sure, I do have a shitload of things to do, and my bills are piling up, and I should really be getting in way more exercise, and my job is a fucking nightmare, my family's a bloody mess, and I have no fucking clue what the fuck I'm doing with my life! I need alcohol! Actually, it's not so much your own stress you need to manage, but rather Snake's. It's apparently not just his body that's feeling the effects of his aging, as Snake is seemingly much more affected by various stress factors than ever before. Anything from prolonged battle engagements to wandering around in the cold can and will cause him stress, which in turn could impact his psyche. If Snake's psyche does start to decrease, the effects are pretty much the same as when the stamina meters did. His aim will be less steady, his vision won't be as clear, and so on and so forth. Luckily, your stress and psyche can be kept in check with various items, calling your support team, listening to some music, or even just staying out of battle, so it's not that tricky to avoid these adverse effects. You may actually want to get your stress up though, at least for a little bit. The thing is that you can actually enter into a so-called combat high if you fire enough shots with an automatic rifle while in alert mode. This will increase your psyche, max out your stress, and improve your accuracy temporarily. It's honestly not all that useful, but fun enough to try, I guess. It may also cause you to encounter another little feature of the game. If you kill enough enemies in a given area, you won't exactly be punished, but the game will let you know that it doesn't exactly approve your actions. How? By having Snake hear a rather familiar voice.
You enjoy all the killing, that's why.
Really, Snake? That made you puke? I mean, I know that read was a little hammy, but it certainly wasn't that bad. No, really, it was his actions that made Snake chunk, as they triggered an audio flashback. As you may have guessed, this game is primarily aimed at fans of the franchise, and as such, it's littered with these flashbacks, which are basically little snippets from the earlier games. In-game, these take the form of audio clips, but you can also trigger various image flashbacks during the cutscenes. Most of these clips and images are relatively inconsequential and unimportant, and some even kinda get in the way, but some also make the cutscenes slightly better, and some are just really fun and kinda clever.
Something happened to me last Thursday when I was driving home. I had a couple of miles to go. I looked up and saw a glowing orange object in the sky to the east. It was moving very irregularly. Suddenly, there was intense light all around me. And when I came to, I was home.
I mean, come on, that's pretty ingenious. Thing is though that while these flashbacks do give you Drebin points and they can trigger some fairly significant waves of nostalgia, I can't imagine the game would exactly suffer without them. Sure, there are a few that really enhance the experience as well, at least for fans, but overall, they do feel a bit superfluous to say the least. At any rate, we better get back to the story. After parting ways with Drebin and eventually making his way to the point where he's meant to rendezvous with Rat Patrol, Snake is suddenly ambushed by an, as of now, unidentified soldier. As it turns out though, this guy is actually a member of Rat Patrol, as Meryl and the rest of them confront Snake after he kicks this guy's fairly useless ass. After clearing up this little misunderstanding, Meryl introduces Snake to her team, which includes the relatively inept Johnny, or Akiba as he's called. The two other rats are pretty forgettable, as they have maybe one line between them, but Akiba is a bit of a different story. He starts out as pretty much just a poor comic relief, but as you'll see, he does turn out to be quite a bit more than that. For now though, Meryl tells Snake where Liquid is holed up, and she also informs him that a female scientist has been by his side since he arrived in the region. Although Snake claims to only be there for threat assessment, Meryl has her doubts. As such, she tries to convince him that there's no need for him to take any action against Liquid, as she believes the SOP system is unbreakable. Before she can convince him any further though, it seems Liquid's private troops, called the Frogs, have tracked down Snake and the rats. After Akiba suffers a weird freakout due to being accused of leading the Frogs to their location, Meryl both physically and verbally abuses him before they all get ready to fight their way out. Oh, and I'm not kidding about that, by the way. Meryl literally smacks Akiba and calls him a dumbass for a possible mistake he made. Okay, so it is a potentially fatal mistake and Akiba is a bit of a dweeb, but still, I don't think a commanding officer is supposed to do that sort of thing. In any case, the following battle can be rather intense and, depending on your tactics, fairly challenging. Basically, you and the rats have to take down the Frogs while making your way out of the building you're in. It is slightly annoying that you fail if any of your comrades die as well, especially since they're not exactly averse to getting in your way, but this is a decent battle overall. Once they make it to the building's basement and away from the Frogs, Meryl gives Snake the directions to Liquid's location and takes off with the rest of her team. While making his way to Liquid's base though, Snake not only encounters a bit more Rebel on PMC fighting, but he also gets his first glimpse of this game's bosses. These rather intimidating creatures are the 4 members of the so-called B&B Corps, also known as the Beauty and the Beast unit. As the name suggests, they actually consist of 4 beautiful women who have been turned into deadly beasts by the ravages of war. They're also an allusion to both the Cobra unit and the Foxhound Squad from MGS1, as the kind of an amalgamation of the two. For starters, there's Laughing Octopus, who walks around on these weird mechanical tentacles and specializes in stealth. After suffering a severely traumatic event as a teenager, her mind was left completely broken, which is why she tends to laugh maniacally during combat. In other words, she crazy. Next, there's Raging Raven, who flies around with a special flight suit and uses missiles and a specialized grenade launcher as her weapons. As her name implies, she is filled with a near uncontrollable rage, again due to a traumatic event in her past, which only makes her that much more dangerous in battle. Then there's the group's resident quadruped Crying Wolf. Utilizing a rather unusual and bulletproof battlesuit, she actually runs around on all fours with increased strength and speed. She's more of a sniper than a brawler though, as her weapon of choice is a railgun fired from a distance. As her name implies, she also cries quite a lot, as she too has been severely scarred by war. Finally, there's the group's leader, Screaming Mantis. Carrying with her not only her own mental scars, but also the memory and soul of none other than Psycho Mantis, she retains pretty much the same powers as her namesake. She's not exactly the most mentally stable person in the world though, and as a result, she frequently screams uncontrollably. All in all then, a very lovely bunch of ladies. Okay, so they do have a few issues, and they certainly dress a bit awkwardly, but they're fucking supermodels! Isn't that just part of their job description? Oh, and when I say the B&Bs are supermodels, I mean that quite literally. You see, Kojima seemingly went out of his way to make sure these beasts also had as much beauty as possible, but not only basing them on real-life models, but actually getting those models to do the motion capture as well. Nothing wrong with that in and of itself, but something about this just feels a bit sleazy. Sure, I get that these characters are supposed to be extremely beautiful on the outside in order to contrast their much darker and uglier insides or whatever, but does that mean that they all need to be camel-toeing and showing it off in close-ups? Does it mean that we need to have Easter eggs where they pose seductively for our layering eyes? Of course it does, it's integral to the experience. We'll get back to the B&Bs later, but for now, Snake continues towards Liquid's camp. Once there, he confirms that Liquid is indeed on site, as are the rats. Meryl calls Snake and warns him that as a peacekeeper, she won't be able to help him, but she won't stand in his way either. Before Snake can do much else though, Liquid orders some sort of activation as something rather peculiar happens. That's right, it seems everyone starts going crazy, and whatever's happening is also affecting Snake. Oh, he may not be throwing up or frothing at the mouth or anything, but he's having trouble staying on his feet and his vision is starting to blur. When Liquid eventually spots him, he spouts something about not being a copy after all, and that he'll surpass his own origin, whatever that means. Before Snake passes out completely, he also discovers that the female scientist by Liquid's side is none other than Naomi, who tells him to go fulfill his destiny before injecting herself with something and leaving Snake the syringe. She and Liquid then take off in a helicopter, as Snake is dragged off the field by a strangely unaffected Akiba. I wonder what that's all about. I mean, why would Akiba, of all people, be the only one immune to whatever just happened there? Is he some sort of superhuman? Does he have some kind of mutant gene? Well, whatever the reason, it definitely couldn't just be something to do with nanomachines or something. That'd just be stupid. In any case, Akiba apparently managed to get Snake back to Otacon and their plane, as he's woken up by the smell of somewhat overcooked eggs made by Sunny. Who the hell is Sunny, you ask? Well, she is the child the Patriots kidnapped from Olga Galukovich. Apparently, Raiden was the one who actually rescued her, but for some reason he later left her in the care of Snake and Otacon. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't bring up Sunny earlier, it's because it didn't really feel necessary. As a matter of fact, it's a bit debatable how significant she really is in general, but I think she's at least worth bringing up. After all, she did co-develop the Mark II with Otacon, and she's the one that decrypts and sorts through most of their files and data. Yup, she's a rather special girl. She may be special in more ways than one, though. You see, it's made very clear that Sunny may be quite a little genius when it comes to tech and computers, but she can't really cook, and more importantly, she has trouble speaking. This is mostly due to the fact that she's basically spent her life in a computer because, as they prove, Otacon and Snake aren't exactly the best father figures. Yeah, I know, they wanted to keep her safe from Patriot eyes, so it probably wouldn't have been a good idea to leave Sunny in a foster home or something, but seriously, these guys are not fit to take care of a child. Shocker, I know, but still, they could at least try. I mean, Otacon seems to treat Sunny with this weird, distant anxiousness, and Snake, well, Snake is just a dick.
Remember the sun being so flat.
Seriously, what the fuck? Why is Snake so mean to Sunny? Hell, he's actually kind of a douche throughout the game, way more than I remember him being in earlier games. Sure, he could be a bit direct and slightly rude at times, but here, he's a genuine jackass. Okay, so he is trying to save the world while on the brink of death and all, but still, he doesn't have to be such a jerk about it. And by the way, two straight men basically deciding to adopt a child together, perfectly normal. There's absolutely no way anyone could possibly get the wrong idea about that. Especially since they probably have conversations like this.
Can you please just change your shirt? Fine. You know what? I'll just go put on a pair of khakis, maybe a polo shirt, and everybody will think we're a couple straight golfing buddies who just decided to have a kid together.
Anyway, I may as well use this opportunity to also mention the pre-mission briefings. Unsurprisingly, they mainly serve to set up the next mission, but there is a bit more to them than that. You see, these aren't just a series of cutscenes, as you also have the option of using the Mark II to interact with the environment and gather various collectibles and items during the cutscenes. Yeah, I guess this is all pretty neat, and there are some nice Easter eggs and details to be found, but it is a bit distracting to have to either split the screen between the cutscene and the Mark II camera, or have the cutscene audio play in the background while you search around for goodies. It also makes the actual content of the briefing seem less important, as that's not what you end up focusing on. Either way, after Snake wakes up from his ordeal, Otacon shows him a video file that Naomi sent them. She tells them that Liquid is holding her captive in his base in South America, and that he's forcing her to do research for him. She also mentions that he's planning to hack the SOP system, and apparently he's discovered some sort of loophole that will allow him to do just that. Before she can say much else though, Naomi seems to get interrupted and ends her video by telling Snake to hurry. After making it to South America, Snake finds Laughing Octopus butchering several rebel soldiers while wearing a mask mimicking his face. It also turns out that Vamp is still alive, as he turns out looking pretty good for a guy that got shot in the head the last time we saw him. As you'll eventually find out though, Vamp is far from immortal, but we'll get to that. For now, he instructs Octopus to leave one of the rebels alive in an attempt to turn them against Snake, what with her wearing that mask and all. As it happens though, Snake doesn't look anything like Octopus otherwise, so it's no surprise that this has absolutely no effect. Nice try though.
Not.
Excuse me?
Once Vamp and Octopus leave, Snake makes his way towards Naomi's location. Before he reaches her though, his path is once again blocked by Drebin. It seems those nanos he injected Snake with also includes a tracker, and Drebin has also managed to figure out who Snake really is, which doesn't really matter. In addition, Snake is also told why the B&Bs will be gunning for him.
Word going round is their natural flesh and blood bodies can't survive in the open for more than a few minutes. And they've been convinced that by killing Snake, their minds will be cleansed. They think it's gonna free them from all the pain, and all the fury, and all the sorrow. Which makes these babes pretty much obsessed with killing you.
Now this is all well and good as far as enemy motivations go and all, but I do have one tiny little question. How the hell does Drebin know all of this? And why doesn't Snake question it in the slightest? Okay, so that's technically two questions, but whatever, I'm confused here. Seriously, I know Drebin says this is all from the streets and all, but are you honestly telling me that there's nothing suspicious about these guys seemingly knowing the exact orders given to these high-ranking and specialized operatives? Would that sort of thing really be as common knowledge as that? And if so, why doesn't Snake already know about it? Things only get more suspicious once you start defeating the B&Bs. You see, after taking down one of these deadly ladies, Drebin will call Snake and basically tell him their entire backstory. I guess these stories are interesting enough and all, but the fact that Drebin just happens to know all this is so damn fishy. It seriously stinks to high heaven, and yet Snake doesn't seem bothered at all. Well, okay, so he does briefly wonder if Drebin is working with the Patriots as he can hack the SOP system to launder guns, but after he reveals that he's able to say Patriot, Snake immediately forgets about those suspicions. After all, it's not like there's any way he could access and manipulate the system to grant him such abilities. Oh wait! Before they part ways though, Drebin and Snake also discuss what would happen if someone actually did manage to gain access to the Patriot's system of AIs. Drebin claims that such a thing would be impossible, but that hypothetically, the AIs could be used as sort of an ID haven. In other words, you could potentially use them to hide and operate outside of the SOP system's restrictions.
Even so, good luck finding a way to access the Patriots' AIs from the outside. It's absolutely impossible. No chance in hell. Like I said, there's no breaking into those AIs.
Well, I guess there's nothing to worry about then. I mean, it's not like there's been any indication whatsoever that Liquid may have found a way into this system after all. Oh, apart from that little thing in the Middle East when everyone started pissing themselves, but that sort of thing happens all the time. It's happening to me right now. So warm. Shortly after Drebin takes off, Snake is suddenly contacted by what turns out to be Raiden. He apparently disappeared shortly after rescuing Sunny, which he claims was because he was asked to track down and recover something rather special in exchange for her location, namely Big Boss's body. He doesn't go into any more detail for now though, but says he'll regroup with Snake later. Continuing his search, Snake eventually finds Naomi and the two have a little chat. To begin with, Naomi explains that the incident in the Middle East was a result of Liquid attempting to free his soldiers' nanomachines from SOP. Unfortunately, it turned out that it wasn't just their IDs and ability to use weapons that were being controlled by that system, but also their mental state during battle.
Just as we predicted, the nanomachine stopped functioning, and the PMC soldiers were freed from the grips of the system. But the moment the system stopped, all the pain and fury and sorrow, all the trauma and stress, all the hatred, regret, guilt, all the sensations that had been suppressed were unleashed within their hearts. The sins of war these soldiers carried inside them returned to assault them in the form of unimaginable shell shock.
While this explains what happened to everyone else, it doesn't really explain how Snake was affected, as he's never been under this system's control. Naomi therefore decides to give Snake a bit of a checkup, and in doing so, she discovers that the fox dye Snake was injected with in Shadow Moses has started to mutate. As you may recall, fox dye was a deadly airborne virus that worked by targeting specific genetic codes. After Shadow Moses, the fox dye inside Snake became inert as all its targets were already dead, but this new mutated strain is apparently becoming much less selective. It seems everyone on the planet will eventually get targeted, and the infection will start to spread in just 3 months.
Ironic, isn't it? You've spent your entire life saving the world from Metal Gear, from nuclear annihilation. And now, you're becoming a doomsday device yourself.
Yeah, and given my lifelong search for irony, you can imagine how happy I am.
While this is obviously devastating news, it actually gets even worse. Naomi claims that there's no way to stop this virus while it's in Snake's system, and he can't be removed either. Basically, he's a ticking time bomb, and he only has 3 months to complete his mission and make his final choice.
And if I choose death first, will that stop fox dye from spreading?
When the host dies, the virus dies with it.
What? What do you want me to say? This is just about the most horrible news anyone could possibly receive, and you're honestly expecting me to make some sort of tasteless joke? You really don't think much of me, do you? Please don't answer that. Naomi also discovers a brand new type of fox dye in Snake's system. Without doing more tests, she can't say exactly who or what it's for though, but it's apparently multiplying rapidly. Snake figures it must have been part of the shot Drebin gave him, but he has no idea what his motivations might be. Then again, he's such a trustworthy guy, so I'm sure it's fine. As for Snake's seizures though, they are apparently caused by his nanomachines malfunctioning as a result of the SOP system interfering with them. Naomi therefore gives Snake a set of shots that can momentarily suppress his nanomachines, which will stop these seizures before they get too bad. There are other uses for these shots as well, but that's another thing we'll get to soon enough. For now though, Snake wants to know where Liquid is, but Naomi only tells him that he's already gone. While she refuses to say more until Snake frees her, Naomi does reveal that Liquid no longer intends to just disable the SOP system, but that he instead plans to hijack and control it. He then plans to use this system to destroy the Patriots and reshape the world in his own image. Snake and Naomi are then suddenly interrupted by some weird screech and a flash grenade as Naomi is taken away and Snake is confronted by a group of frogs and Laughing Octopus herself. This sets off our first real boss fight, and it's a pretty decent one all things considered, at least for the most part. First you have to take out the frogs, which isn't anything worth talking about, and then you just have to find and shoot Octopus until she's defeated. You see, Octopus will occasionally try to fool you by hiding and or using her camouflage skills, but she's so easy to spot. I mean, does she really not think anyone would be suspicious of a giant Mark II? How dumb is this bitch? Bearing in mind that she's also relatively easy to hit, it shouldn't really take too long before this octopus is cut down to size. This is only half the battle though, as she then discards her tentacles in what is honestly a pretty disturbing scene. After also rambling about how she's not really laughing at all or something like that, she slowly approaches Snake again. Which I guess is scary now? Seriously, I get that these beauties are supposed to be unhinged and dangerous or whatever, but are you really trying to make us afraid of a sexy young woman slowly and slightly suggestively walking towards us? Because I would totally get that. I mean, even the thought is making me sweat. In a rather specific area, but still, it's torrential. All jokes aside though, the beauty parts of these boss fights are kinda silly. Yeah, the whole thing where the color washes out and all you can hear are the sounds of horror is somewhat interesting, but the battles themselves are a complete waste of time. The damn beauties won't even do anything unless you stand completely still and or don't attack them, so why even bother with this? After finishing Octopus and picking up her face camo, Snake gets a call from Drebin, who has an absolute bullshit explanation for that new fox dye Snake believes was in his injection. Well, I say explanation, but he really only points out that it's technically possible someone else gave him that virus. No, really, that's his only defense, and it's apparently good enough for Snake, as he never brings it up again. I also have to say that the B&B backstories Drebin relays to Snake are again pretty interesting and all, but this exposition dump after every boss fight is really clunky and unnatural. In addition, this is exactly the type of thing that would at most be part of an optional codec conversation in the previous games, so there's honestly no good reason for these segments to be here. In any case, Snake now has to find Naomi again, and luckily, Raiden has some helpful advice for him. It seems he's been trained to scout like a ninja since last we saw him, though there's nothing all that remarkable about these skills. They basically boil down to following the correct shoe prints, but luckily there are enough false tracks and other traps here to still make all of this rather enjoyable. Utilizing Raiden's techniques, Snake does eventually find Naomi being taken aboard a helicopter by Vamp and a group of soldiers. While Vamp is on the phone with Liquid talking about doing something or other while they still can, Snake carefully takes aim and shoots him in the head, which worked so well the last time someone tried it. Fine, so Vamp does actually collapse as he, in his own words, needs to take a nap, but it's not exactly out of the game. He even manages to initiate whatever he and Liquid were talking about, as he tells his men to take what appears to be the same sort of shots that Naomi gave to Snake. The helicopter then takes off as another SOP test ensues, and Snake and the soldiers start losing it again. While Snake manages to stop his convulsions by using one of his syringes, he is then confronted by some geckos, and by that I don't mean the cute little lizards. No, I'm talking about these automated Metal Gear derivatives that can be fairly troublesome. Luckily, Drebin suddenly races in to rescue both him and Naomi as the soldiers start getting back on their feet, seemingly turning into zombies. Okay, fine, so they're not really zombies, but then again, it would be pretty damn stupid if they were. I mean, it's silly enough to have these soldiers acting this way, but can you imagine if a Metal Gear game actually had literal zombies? Neither can I, because no one would be dumb enough to make something that moronic, would they? Would they, Konami? Anyway, the following sequence is all well and good, if a teeny bit too lengthy and somewhat annoying. You basically have to man the machine gun mounted on top of Drebin's truck and shoot your way through hordes of zombie-like soldiers and geckos. The soldiers can potentially climb onto the vehicle and attack you from behind though, so you'll have to watch out for that as well. Eventually, Drebin will make it to a marketplace where he proceeds to flip the truck over, trying to avoid some geckos. Everyone still makes it out of the truck okay, but the geckos are closing in fast. As luck would have it though, it seems backup arrives just in time as Raiden suddenly appears and wow, he sure has changed, hasn't he? As have people's opinion of him apparently. Okay, so maybe it just seemed like this to me, and I'll try not to be too insulting to anyone here, but Raiden's reappearance in this game made a lot of people act like complete and utter hypocrites. What I mean is that they could not stop whining about how awful this guy was the first time around, but now he's suddenly the coolest thing ever. Sure, he's different, but it's still the same character. Don't get me wrong, this Raiden is way more capable, impressive and interesting, but that kinda goes without saying considering he does now have a lot more experience under his belt. Hell, he's become a damn cyborg ninja, but if anything, he's still just as whiny as he ever was. In fact, I find his personality way more annoying in this than I ever did in MGS2. Yes, I did just say that. Either way, Snake and Naomi use this opportunity to get to Odacon's chopper, which is apparently waiting for them at the other side of the market. In order to buy them some time, Raiden faces off against the geckos, and yeah, the following scene is pretty damn awesome. Wow, that was a real snooze fest, wasn't it? I don't think I've seen anything this boring since that animated film about the visually spectacular 1,000-year war between the avians and the insects.
Attack! Charge!
Sorry, I'm being told this would be very expensive to animate, so instead here's some stock footage of an old plane trying to take off. They didn't have enough wings.
In all seriousness though, this is a pretty amazing cutscene, but it does go on for a little bit too long. No, it doesn't become boring or anything, but I'm fairly certain it could have been cut down without the game suffering too much. I mean, I don't even know how well I've managed to showcase the scene, as it's way too long to show off in its entirety, which doesn't quite seem reasonable to me. While Raiden is busy showing off his new skills, Snake and Naomi are running towards Otacon while dodging a few more geckos. Actually, Naomi runs ahead of Snake as she's nowhere to be seen during this whole sequence. Oh, this is definitely better than having to escort her yourself, but it's still strange when characters just warp out of existence like this. It kinda breaks the immersion. Either way, this short gameplay segment does pretty much just boil down to running towards the objective, but you do have to keep a bit of an eye out for the geckos. Most of them aren't difficult to avoid at all, but some pose a bit more of a challenge, especially the very last one. Seriously, make the wrong move here, and this bitch will insta-kill you with one sweep of his leg. That's fair, isn't it? If and when you can make it past this last gecko though, Snake and Naomi will board Otacon's chopper as they all take off back towards Raiden. Unfortunately, Vamp has managed to recover from his little boo-boo as he's seen dancing his way towards a now tied up Raiden. Once he reaches him, Vamp stabs Raiden in the chest and discovers that he's not the only one who can cheat death. Vamp doesn't really get the chance to test just how much punishment Raiden's new body can take though, as Snake shoots off one of Raiden's restraints, letting him fling away the remaining geckos and square off against Vamp. The following fight scene is pretty intense and the choreography is simply amazing, but I again think it goes on for a tad too long. Still, it is at least fairly enjoyable. Raiden does eventually manage to put Vamp down for the count, but not without taking quite a bit of damage himself. While he does make it on board Otacon's helicopter, he's fading fast as Naomi tells the others that he'll need a transfusion, or rather infusion, of artificial white blood. She's not sure where he can receive such a treatment though, but luckily, Raiden seems to have an idea.
Europe.
Go meet Big Mama.
Excuse me?
No! Oh, fuck me backwards, no! Don't ever even joke about putting Martin Lawrence within 2,000 light years of this franchise. It can make the universe implode! Fucking hell, that gave me chest pains. I couldn't possibly continue right now, so why don't we make this a two-parter and leave the conclusion for next time? After all, we still have plenty left to discuss.